On April 19, 2005, a silver Range Rover sat exposed at a car wash near West 7 Mile and Faust Street. Inside, Blade Icewood rested in a wheelchair while another vehicle rolled beside the passenger door without drawing much attention. Roughly 17 rounds tore through the truck, forcing his driver to run while Blade remained trapped where the gunfire found him. Police quickly suspected somebody had returned to finish earlier business, although the road toward that ambush had started months before. Blade Icewood was only 28 when those bullets ended a life Detroit already believed should have ended during another attack. 7 months earlier, gunmen had shot him repeatedly inside his Oak Park home, leaving him paralyzed from the chest downward. Most people would have disappeared after surviving something that serious, but Blade returned publicly, recording music while seated in his wheelchair. That decision turned a wounded local rapper into something larger, while also keeping him visible to whoever still considered him unfinished business. The mystery around his death stretched far beyond one shooter pulling beside a parked Range Rover during an ordinary afternoon. Another Detroit music figure had already been murdered, while an innocent man standing nearby had also lost his life during that attack. Behind both killings sat a disputed rap name, competing neighborhood loyalties, independent record money, stolen jewelry rumors, plus old East-West tension. To understand why Blade remained hunted after paralysis, you need to know Antonio "Wipeout" Cadell Jr. Before either man became part of Detroit folklore, the city had already developed its own rules for reputation, geography, music, and neighborhood identity. Detroit never operated like Los Angeles, where large blood or Crip alliances could spread across several districts under one recognizable banner. Around Detroit, loyalty often stayed closer to individual blocks, housing areas, streets, record stores, relatives, and long-standing neighborhood connections. Somebody saying he came from Joy Row, Puritan, Schoolcraft, 7 Mile, or Jefferson and Connor was also explaining his entire social position. That map mattered inside a city losing residents, jobs, businesses, stable institutions, plus many traditional roads toward long-term financial security. Detroit counted 951,270 residents during the 2000 census, then dropped to 713,777 by 2010, losing 1/4 of its population. Empty houses multiplied, formal opportunities tightened, while informal economies offered young men faster routes toward money, recognition, mobility, and control. Rap became one possible lane, although local success still depended heavily upon street credibility, physical presence, neighborhood support, and visible proof. Local music rarely moved through polished national systems, so Detroit artists created an economy around trunks, storefronts, clubs, promoters, neighborhood radio, and hand-to-hand sales. Mama Teresa operated Platinum Records on West 7 Mile Road, where promotional posters doubled as a working map of Detroit's rap scene. She could identify which performer came from Joy Road, Puritan Avenue, Schoolcraft, 7 Mile, or another pocket carrying its own alliances. Even church friends criticized her for selling street records, although she believed music could keep young men occupied with something constructive. Sales tracking services missed much of this business, since many small retailers never reported figures through official national measurement systems. That meant reputation could become almost as valuable as documented revenue, especially when buzz moved faster than verifiable sales numbers. A crew rumored to sell thousands might secure club performances, radio spins, stronger distribution, better features, or attention from major label representatives. In that environment, ownership of a recognizable name was not simply pride talking. That name could control money flowing through Detroit streets. Michigan State sociologist Dr. Carl Taylor traced Detroit's East-West split beyond contemporary rap, linking it with older class, geography, and black bottom history. His explanation described a long-running perception that West Side areas carried greater affluence, while East Side neighborhoods received rougher reputations from outsiders. Not every Detroiter accepted those broad categories, yet people still used them while interpreting rivalries, ambition, spending habits, plus neighborhood posture. When violence later touched both sides, residents already possessed an old framework for deciding who might strike first or answer afterward. Veteran observers compared Detroit's nervous atmosphere during 2004 with memories of Young Boys Incorporated, the feared drug organization known as YBI. A police officer rejected any direct comparison between underground rappers and the structured narcotics crews that controlled neighborhoods during the mid-'80s. Still, the comparison revealed how tense residents felt while shootings rose across the city at an alarming pace. Detroit recorded roughly 808 shootings during 2004's first 6 months, compared with 1,032 throughout the entire previous year. Inside that climate, Antonio "Wipeout" Cadell Jr. built one of Detroit's most promising East Side music operations through planning, promotion, and relentless local networking. Born March 23, 1972, Wipeout came from the Jefferson and Connor area, where he developed into more of a businessman than a spotlight-seeking performer. He occasionally rapped, although his real strength involved organizing artists, building Please Believe It records, developing releases, plus creating a recognizable movement. His signature "Oh boy" catchphrase traveled through records, club appearances, neighborhood conversations, and promotional campaigns connected with his growing company. The East Side Cheddar Boys carried Wipeout's vision through a 10-man roster featuring Anguish, also known as Malik, alongside P. Frown and Lil Cheesy. Lil Baby, Lil Dre, Lil Joe, Rel, Tough Tone, Bucho, plus Maul completed a lineup designed to flood Detroit with different voices. Their album Makin' Cheddar on DA Eastside arrived around 2000, while I'm a Cheddar Boy became a heavily played local anthem. That song carried the crew through radio rotations, strip club testing grounds, regional performances, neighborhood stores, plus constant street-level promotion. Strip clubs functioned like Detroit laboratories, where DJs could test whether a record had enough energy to move dancers, patrons, and neighborhood tastemakers. Once, I'm a Cheddar Boy caught momentum inside those rooms, its hook spread through radio, cars, parties, barbershops, and local conversation. People claimed the group had moved tens of thousands of copies, although informal distribution made precise totals nearly impossible to verify. Rumors also placed Sony and Universal around the operation, giving Wipeout's camp the appearance of standing near a national breakthrough. His ambitions went beyond one successful single, since Please Believe It was designed as a complete label capable of carrying several releases. The crew reportedly filmed material around former Detroit Pistons player Jerry Stackhouse's mansion, reinforcing the image of an expanding East Side empire. Wipeout stayed mostly behind that presentation, allowing his artists to perform while he handled business, connections, direction, plus brand development. Detroit could see its operation gaining ground, which naturally drew attention from people who believed that Cheddar Boys' identity belonged elsewhere. By September 2004, Wipeout was 32, engaged to Sharonda Taylor, connected with Bishop Eddie Long's Atlanta megachurch, and reportedly seeking greater stability. Those personal changes never removed him from Detroit nightlife, where business contacts, music associates, rivals, promoters, and neighborhood figures regularly crossed paths. On September 18th, Radio 1 station WDTJ-FM hosted its regular Friday hip-hop and R&B event at the Candy Bar downtown. The club stood near Woodward Avenue and John R., while rapper Freeway had performed there earlier during that crowded evening. After the club emptied, Wipeout remained outside when 36-year-old Anthony Robertson recognized him and walked over to offer a greeting. Two gunmen approached shortly afterward, then opened fire before either man could escape the attack unfolding near the nightclub entrance. Wipeout died at the scene from multiple wounds, while Robertson later died after being caught in violence unrelated to his own life. Within hours, Detroit connected the shooting with the Cheddar Boys dispute, though another explanation soon complicated that easy conclusion. 3 weeks earlier, two men associated with Wipeout had allegedly taken a platinum necklace from another customer inside the same nightclub. The victim reportedly asked Wipeout to secure its return, but those men refused, leaving his name tangled inside a dispute he never created. Neighborhood talk eventually suggested Wipeout had participated, even though an insider close to his family insisted he tried resolving the problem. Detroit now faced two possible motives, one involving rap ownership, another involving stolen jewelry, while neither explanation delivered a clean answer. That uncertainty mattered, since street rumors often traveled faster than police findings, especially where victims, witnesses, and suspects distrusted formal investigations. One version said the East-West music conflict had finally spilled outside studios, while another suggested Wipeout died over somebody else's robbery. Anthony Robertson received almost no public attention afterward. despite losing his life simply after recognizing a familiar local figure. Detroit initially treated Wipeout's murder like the closing chapter of one growing conflict, though the next attack proved otherwise. Darnell Quincy Lindsay entered the world on March 14, 1977, long before Detroit knew him as Blade Icewood. Accounts disagree about which side truly raised him, with some placing his childhood near Detroit's east side before a teenage move toward Southfield. Other versions connect his identity firmly with West Side neighborhoods around 7 Mile, Evergreen, Joy Road, plus the circles that became Street Lord's territory. Those conflicting histories followed Blade throughout his career, although nobody disputed where his strongest neighborhood alliances eventually landed. By his late teens, Lindsay had adopted the Blade Icewood name while moving through Detroit's independent music scene with a commanding physical presence. That local underground required crews to function like labels, street teams, management companies, security details, plus extended families sharing the same reputation. Street Lords developed from a wide circle that included Yacht, Jesse James, O'Dalla, Brick, Baby L, Juan, plus TJ Da Thug, G-Rock, Fat Mike, Lil Cuz, Rook, Cash Out Calhoun, and K-Deezy also became associated with the original movement during its formative years. Later additions included Lady Blade, DJ Mark G, Giff Reynolds, Young Roy Boy, Ron, plus other artists moving through related Detroit camps. Blade eventually emerged as the loudest public face, even though the operation involved far more personalities than one recognizable frontman. Around 1999, the crew released Platinum Rollies' Don't TikTok through an independent network built far outside national record company systems. Their music moved through neighborhood stores, car trunks, street tables, clubs, personal connections, plus local distributors who rarely reported official sales figures. The album included Come Roll With a Nigga, which became a remembered West Side record long after the original lineup fractured. Those sales never produced clean national numbers, although visibility across Detroit gave Street Lords something more valuable within their immediate environment. They had recognizable jewelry, expensive vehicles, local club records, respected connections, plus a frontman willing to speak as the movement belonged to him. The title Platinum Rollies' Don't TikTok also carried a message understood immediately by listeners familiar with luxury watches and counterfeit status. A real mechanical Rolex moved differently from the cheap imitations sold by people pretending they possess money, rank, or authenticity. Street Lords applied that same test toward music, meaning artists needed genuine neighborhood standing rather than borrowed slang, manufactured stories, or copied identities. Blade presented himself as the real article, speaking slowly while projecting the confidence of somebody who never expected his claims to face polite disagreement. That posture became crucial once another Detroit crew began making money from a name he believed originated inside his own neighborhood. Across town, Wipeout's East Side Cheddar Boys had already gained serious momentum through I'm a Cheddar Boy and Making Cheddar on DA East Side. Their radio success gave the phrase a public identity, yet Blade maintained that Cheddar Boys belonged around 7 Mile and Evergreen long before Wipeout's camp recorded anything. In Blade's version, neighborhood hustlers called themselves Cheddar Boys while getting money, wearing expensive jewelry, driving flashy cars, plus building reputations before rap formalized everything. He claimed Street Lords grew directly from that West Side circle, meaning the East Side Cheddar Boys had taken more than catchy wording. They had converted his neighborhood's identity into a profitable brand while receiving stronger radio attention than his own crew initially managed. An insider close to Wipeout's family later described a more complicated relationship than the public rivalry suggested during that period. According to that account, Blade and Wipeout knew each other personally, understood the danger, and then agreed to keep their disagreement confined to records. Both groups could release music, defend their versions, trade verbal shots, plus compete for Detroit without letting associates transform the dispute into physical retaliation. That arrangement sounded reasonable while both leaders controlled their respective circles, although neighborhood disputes rarely remained limited to the intentions of two men. Friends, younger affiliates, club crowds, street rumors, plus business competition gradually placed additional pressure on every public statement. Street Lords escalated their ownership claim through Platinum Masterpiece, released in 2003 with original Cheddar Boys attached directly beneath the album title. That subtitle challenged Wipeout's entire operation while giving listeners a simple choice between the established East Side name and Blade's claim of authorship. The record featured Juvenile, Beanie Siegel, plus Brian Birdman Williams, three expensive guests capable of making a Detroit independent release appear nationally connected. Juvenile's presence carried another layer, since his Cash Money background represented the Southern independent success Detroit crews hoped to reproduce locally. Still, those recognizable features failed to generate the same neighborhood momentum Eastside Cheddar Boys already enjoyed through their radio-friendly anthem. The Eastside crew answered through Boss Up and Take They Money, whose title aimed directly at Blade's language, and his record Boy Would You. Every musical response widened the argument while forcing supporters to defend whichever side they believed truly owned the Cheddar Boys' identity. There were no corporate executives arranging meetings, no major label lawyers protecting investments, plus no national media pressure encouraging either group to resolve matters quietly. These artists shared the same clubs, stores, promoters, neighborhoods, radio outlets, mutual acquaintances, plus crowded Detroit nightlife spaces where disrespect could become personal quickly. What looked like marketing from outside the city felt closer to somebody taking another man's name, history, credibility, plus potential income. Blade made his position unmistakable on the bonus DVD packaged with his solo project Stackmaster, using an ordinary haircut as his public courtroom. Sitting inside a garage with an apron around his neck, Blade explained that the Cheddar Boys' identity came from his 7 Mile and Evergreen neighborhood. His measured delivery carried no confusion, apology, or attempt to soften the accusation, leaving Wipeout's camp clearly identified as the later claimant. The setting made the speech feel less like a polished interview and more like neighborhood testimony recorded among people already familiar with the dispute. Anybody watching understood that Blade had tied his personal credibility to proving street lords were the original Cheddar Boys. Meanwhile, K-DZ had separated from the original Street Lords circle around 2000, taking affiliated artists toward Dirty Glove Entertainment. That split revealed how quickly Detroit crews could divide internally while still sharing neighborhoods, collaborators, business relationships, plus overlapping street histories. Blade remained focused on strengthening Street Lords, although every departure changed the balance around him while competing movements expanded elsewhere. Outside Detroit, Eminem had become one of the world's biggest recording artists, yet local figures like Blade and Wipeout commanded another kind of respect. Their power existed inside a smaller arena where everybody could reach the same clubs, recognize the same vehicles, plus hear every insult immediately. By 2004, Words had created separate versions of Detroit history, with each camp insisting the other side had copied something valuable. The disagreement still officially lived on records, although the surrounding city was experiencing rising shootings, nervous clubs, plus increasingly dangerous neighborhood tension. Wipeout's East Side operation had momentum, while Blade's West Side camp had doubled down publicly through albums, interviews, slogans, and expensive guest appearances. Nobody had proven that either leader ordered violence, yet the environment had already started connecting music competition with possible street retaliation. Once Wipeout fell outside the candy bar, those years of recorded hostility gave Detroit an immediate suspect story before investigators established any motive. 9 days after Antonio Wipeout Cadell was killed outside the candy bar, Community Christian Fellowship Church was filled with mourners carrying grief, suspicion, plus visible fear. Hundreds packed the sanctuary wearing suits, sports jerseys, or white shirts printed with Wipeout's face, while custom SUVs and foreign luxury cars crowded nearby streets. Detroit police placed officers inside the vestibule, then stationed marked patrol cars around surrounding corners in case the funeral turned into another shooting scene. The precautions showed how quickly Wipeout's murder had changed the mood, since even a church service now felt vulnerable to retaliation. That fear surfaced during the viewing when one distressed young man nearly collapsed, pushed through people, then shouted for everyone to stop touching him. His sudden movement sent dozens toward the exits, with mourners briefly believing armed men had entered the building or another attack had started. Bishop Samuel Wilson calmed the room before panic became a stampede, explaining that the disturbance was not gunfire or an ambush. Even after the order returned, the incident exposed how badly Detroit expected the conflict to follow Wipeout directly into his own funeral. Wipeout's funeral program looked more like a glossy hip-hop magazine than a traditional church booklet. blending mourning with unfinished business from Please Believe It Records. Its pages displayed planned albums, label branding, luxury vehicles, neighborhood photographs, plus the different names people had called him throughout his life. Lil Tone, Fat Tone, Beatbox Tone, Big Homie, Big Baby, and Wipeout appeared together like headlines documenting every stage of his identity. One photograph showed him praying between a Hummer and a pickup truck, giving Bishop Wilson an opening to discuss the life Wipeout had reportedly been trying to change. According to Wilson, Wipeout had recently joined Bishop Eddie Long's Atlanta megachurch while moving toward greater stability with his fiancée, Sharonda Taylor. He still enjoyed jewelry, chrome rims, expensive vehicles, music promotion, plus the street image that built his local influence. However, people close to him believed he had started looking beyond that lifestyle toward marriage, church membership, and a more settled future. That possible transition made his death harder for mourners to process, since he was killed while apparently trying to organize the life around him. Strike, the Detroit rapper and actor who appeared in 8 Mile, knew both Wipeout and Blade Icewood personally during that tense period. He described them as products of their environment, while acknowledging that only a small number of people living that life ever escaped completely. Other local artists began avoiding nightclubs, performances, and crowded gatherings where rival associates might cross paths without warning. Detroit's underground scene depended on those same venues for promotion, yet every club now carried the possibility of becoming another candy bar. While Wipeout's family buried him, people across the city kept arguing about what had actually brought the shooters to Woodward Avenue and John R. One explanation blamed the original Cheddar Boys dispute, pointing toward years of recorded insults between Wipeout's East Side camp and Blade's street lords. Another focused on the platinum necklace allegedly stolen 3 weeks earlier by men loosely connected with Wipeout at that same club. Neither theory had produced an arrest, although both gave angry people enough material to choose their own version before investigators established anything publicly. 2 days after Wipeout's killing, that uncertainty landed directly at Blade Icewood's home in Oak Park, a suburb outside Detroit city limits. On September 20th, 2004, armed men entered the house carrying an AK-47, then opened fire on Darnell Quincy Lindsay at close range. 7 bullets struck Blade, leaving him critically wounded before emergency responders transported him to intensive care. Doctors saved his life, although damage from the attack left him paralyzed from the chest downward. The timing immediately shaped Detroit's interpretation, since Blade had been attacked only 48 hours after Wipeout died outside the candy bar. People who already believed the name dispute had turned deadly viewed the Oak Park shooting as direct retaliation against the street lord's frontman. Under that street calculation, proof mattered less than association, especially after Blade publicly claimed his camp created the Cheddar Boys' identity. Even people uncertain about Wipeout's killers could understand why somebody seeking revenge might choose Blade as the most visible target. Oak Park police treated the shooting as a planned home invasion rather than a random burst of neighborhood gunfire. The attackers knew Blade's address, entered his residence, brought a military-style rifle, and then fired enough rounds to leave little doubt about their intention. Sergeant Mike Pinkerton later confirmed that investigators never arrested anyone for the attack, despite the seriousness of the evidence. Blade also refused to cooperate with detectives, leaving police without assistance from the only surviving person positioned closest to the assault. That refusal followed an unwritten street code familiar throughout communities where residents distrusted police or feared consequences for providing information. Blade had built his reputation through independence, neighborhood authority, and the idea that personal problems stayed within the circle that produced them. Helping investigators identify his shooters could have damaged that image, even though remaining silent protected whoever had entered his home. The result left Detroit with a heavily armed ambush, a living victim, clear physical damage, yet no publicly identified gunman. The attack also raised questions about whether the shooters had targeted Blade specifically or expected someone else inside the Oak Park residence. TV One later revisited those questions through Sins of the City, examining the evidence surrounding who came looking for Blade Icewood. The program's framing suggested the men arrived with prior knowledge, preparation, plus a clear interest in finding him rather than firing randomly inside the house. Still, no public case has ever established who ordered the attack, who carried the AK-47, or whether Wipeout's murder directly motivated their actions. Back in Detroit, the consequences moved beyond one hospital room as artists, promoters, relatives, store owners, plus neighborhood associates watched the sequence tighten. Wipeout was dead, Anthony Robertson had been killed while greeting him, and then Blade had been shot 7 times before the city buried its first victim. Mama Teresa's record store posters now represented crews surrounded by suspicion, while Dr. Carl Taylor's East-West history suddenly felt less academic than immediate. Every lyric, club appearance, rumor, friendship, or neighborhood connection could now be interpreted as evidence inside a conflict nobody fully understood. The city's shooting numbers made that anxiety even harder to dismiss, with roughly 808 incidents recorded during the first 6 months of 2004. Detroit had already been dealing with rising gun violence before Wipeout and Blade became its most recognizable rap-related casualties. Their fame gave reporters memorable names, although dozens of other victims were being wounded throughout neighborhoods without receiving similar attention. That wider crisis allowed the rap dispute to blend into an environment where armed retaliation already felt dangerously available. Inside intensive care, Blade faced injuries that should have ended both his mobility and the public career built around physical command. Outside the hospital, Wipeout supporters remained angry, Street Lord's associates remained exposed, plus police still lacked answers about either attack. Detroit now had one murdered rapper, one dead civilian, one paralyzed rival, and several competing stories moving faster than verified evidence. Nobody knew who would be next, although almost everyone understood that the situation had not reached its final chapter. Doctors reportedly told Blade Icewood that the damage from 7 gunshots would keep him from walking again for the rest of his life. Detroit also assumed paralysis had ended the career of a rapper whose reputation depended heavily upon size, presence, movement, plus visible street authority. Instead of disappearing into private recovery, Blade returned to recording within roughly 3 months, while the Oak Park shooters remained unidentified. That choice immediately changed how people viewed him, since survival now carried more weight than the physical intimidation that built his earlier image. His first major statement after the attack came through Ride on Me, a record Detroit interpreted as a direct warning toward whoever entered his home. Blade never publicly identified the shooters, yet the lyrics suggested he believed their names were already known inside his circle. The song did not ask for sympathy, describe helplessness, or present him as somebody removed from the conflict surrounding Wipeout's death. Instead, it continued the same hard language that had defined Street Lord's records before the wheelchair entered the picture. The accompanying video pushed that message even further by placing Blade's altered body directly in front of the city, watching him. He appeared seated in his wheelchair while wearing jewelry, throwing up his set, staring into the camera, plus carrying himself as if nothing important had changed. That visual mattered inside Detroit rap, where artists were often judged through clothing, vehicles, body language, neighborhood access, plus whether their lives matched their lyrics. The chair should have weakened his image, but Blade used it as proof that 7 bullets had failed to remove his authority. Detroit responded by turning Ride on Me into an underground classic that spread through cars, clubs, record stores, barbershops, plus neighborhood conversations. People were no longer discussing Blade only as the Street Lord's rapper arguing over the original Cheddar Boy's name. He had become the man who survived an AK-47 attack, lost movement below his chest, then returned publicly while speaking toward his enemies. That transformation gave him a level of attention that earlier albums, expensive guest appearances, plus local disputes had never produced alone. The comeback fit Detroit's established preference for blunt street realism, where artists usually presented experiences directly instead of hiding everything behind complicated metaphors. Street Lord's records had always sounded like local testimony, with Blade speaking as someone reporting his own world rather than inventing distant characters. Once his wounds became visible, listeners no longer needed to imagine whether the danger around his music had been exaggerated for entertainment. His body had become evidence, while the wheelchair showed every audience exactly what the unresolved conflict had already cost him. That same image also strengthened Blade's connection with Detroit's larger culture of authenticity, where fake watches, copied slang, borrowed names, and manufactured backgrounds received little respect. His Raleigh's Don't TikTok language had always separated genuine status from imitation, but surviving the Oak Park attack made that principle brutally physical. Blade could no longer rely on movement, height, or conventional intimidation, so every appearance tested whether his influence existed beyond his body. Detroit's answer appeared inside the crowds, music circulation, plus continued attention that followed his return. Rather than limiting himself to one revenge-focused record, Blade began building Icewood Entertainment while still adapting to life in a wheelchair. He signed Candy Kane, Bali, plus Cash Out, three artists previously connected with Dirty Glove Entertainment and Blade's former associate K. Deasy. Those additions turned his recovery into a business move, showing he still intended to organize talent, release projects, plus control something larger than his own career. The label also placed him back inside Detroit's competitive music economy, where every roster decision could affect alliances, loyalties, plus neighborhood perception. Blade started assembling an album tentatively titled Blood, Sweat and Tears, a phrase carrying an unusually literal meaning after his shooting and rehabilitation. The project was expected to capture his new condition, unresolved anger, business ambitions, plus the same West Side confidence that had defined Stackmaster. He continued working while police lacked arrests for the home invasion, leaving music as his only public response toward the men who attacked him. Every recording session therefore carried another question, since listeners wondered whether his lyrics might reveal something investigators had failed to uncover. By 2005, Blade had earned nominations in 3 categories at the 3rd Annual Detroit Hip Hop Awards, showing his local standing had increased after Paralysis. Those nominations suggested the comeback was more than street curiosity, especially inside an industry that had watched several independent Detroit movements rise without national recognition. Blade appeared closer to a broader breakthrough than ever before, even though his body required assistance and his security situation remained unresolved. The same visibility helping his career also made his routines, vehicles, associates, plus public appearances easier for enemies to follow. His influence continued growing after death through younger Detroit artists who treated Street Lord's music as foundational rather than outdated neighborhood history. Doughboy's Cash Out referenced Boy Would You and carried Blade's bossed-up language into another generation of West Side rap. Damjan Boy recorded Rip Icewood, while Baby Smooth sampled elements connected with Blade's world and adapted that cool delivery for newer listeners. Damado also grew up hearing his music, proving the Street Lord's sound remained active long after the original crew scattered. V's later named Blade among the Detroit artists who helped shape his approach, connecting a modern rap star directly with the wheelchair-era legend. J.U.S. went even further during a 2024 interview, describing Blade as the biggest rapper Detroit had ever produced from his perspective. That statement was not based upon national chart totals, major label awards, or mainstream record sales, yet it reflected how local memory measured importance. Inside Detroit, impact often traveled through slang, cadence, neighborhood influence, visual style, plus records passed between generations without national media involvement. The wheelchair became central to that legacy since it transformed Blade from a respected local rapper into a contradiction Detroit could not ignore. Street rules suggested that an ambush Sirius should have removed him from public life, either through death, fear, silence, or permanent isolation. Instead, he returned with new music, a label, artists, award nominations, plus a video that made his injuries part of the presentation. Each appearance reminded the city that whoever entered his Oak Park home had failed to complete the job. That failure also created a dangerous possibility since Blade's survival allowed him to remain visible inside the same unresolved network of rumors, revenge, and neighborhood suspicion. Wipeout was still dead. Anthony Robertson remained an innocent casualty, plus nobody had been charged for the attack that placed Blade in the chair. Ride on Me convinced supporters that he was fearless, though it may also have convinced his enemies that he intended to stay active. The comeback made Blade larger than before, but it also showed somebody that 7 bullets had not been enough. On April 19, 2005, Blade Icewood arrived at a car wash near West 7 Mile Road and Faust Street inside his silver Range Rover. He was seated on the passenger side in his wheelchair, relying on another man to drive while workers moved around the exposed vehicle. A second vehicle pulled alongside, giving the shooter a clear angle toward the side where Blade could neither run nor take cover. Roughly 17 rounds tore through the passenger door and windows, while the driver escaped from the Range Rover before the gunfire stopped. Blade remained trapped inside the same luxury truck that once represented his recovery, business ambitions, and continued authority across Westside Detroit. Emergency responders reached the scene, but Darnell Quincy Lindsay was pronounced dead there at 28 years old. 7 months earlier, another group had fired 7 rounds into him during the Oak Park home invasion and failed to take his life. This time, the number of shots suggested the gunman intended to remove every possibility of another hospital recovery or wheelchair comeback. Detroit police viewed the attack as targeted, especially after investigators considered Blade's unresolved shooting, recent music, public visibility, and connections with street lords. One officer described the murder as somebody finishing what had already been started, a conclusion that matched what many residents believed immediately. The location also raised questions, since a car wash left Blade stationary, visible, dependent upon his driver, and unable to reposition himself quickly. Whoever followed or located him understood that the chair had turned an ordinary stop into an almost perfect ambush. The investigation eventually produced a conviction connected with Larry Joe Davidson, whose name appears in Michigan Department of Corrections records under several listed aliases. Those records include convictions for assault with intent to murder, first-degree home invasion, plus a felony firearm enhancement tied to Wayne County proceedings. Davidson received a sentence stretching from roughly 46 years to 100 years on the assault count, effectively keeping him in prison for life. Secondary accounts describe the outcome differently, sometimes mentioning 3 life terms, though the available records consistently show an extremely lengthy sentence. What the conviction explained was who faced punishment after Blade's killing, while the larger question of motive remained far less settled. No public confession clearly connected Davidson to Wipeout, the Eastside Cheddar Boys, the Oak Park shooters, or the dispute over ownership of one name. Police had also never arrested anyone for the September 20th, 2004, home invasion that left Blade paralyzed from the chest downward. That gap meant the first attack and final murder could be connected, although the public record never completely established the full chain. The most familiar explanation starts with the original Cheddar Boys dispute between Blade's street lords and Wipeout's Eastside Cheddar Boys. Blade claimed the name came from 7 Mile and Evergreen, while Wipeout's group had turned I'm a Cheddar Boy into a popular Detroit record. Street lords answered through Platinum Masterpiece, branding themselves original Cheddar Boys, while Blade repeated his ownership claim on the Stackmaster DVD. Once Wipeout was murdered outside the candy bar, years of public insults gave Detroit an immediate storyline linking music rivalry with bloodshed. That version still runs into the anonymous insider who said Blade and Wipeout had already agreed to keep everything on wax. According to that account, both men understood how dangerous their associates could become once neighborhood pride moved beyond recorded responses. If the agreement was genuine, the main figures may have been trying to prevent exactly what later happened around them. Their intentions could not control every friend, affiliate, rumor, or person seeking revenge after Wipeout's death. The second explanation centers on a platinum necklace allegedly taken inside the candy bar 3 weeks before the September shooting. 2 men associated with Wipeout reportedly robbed another clubgoer, while Wipeout unsuccessfully tried persuading them to return the jewelry. Rumors then connected him directly with the theft, possibly making him a target over property he had never personally stolen. Under that theory, Blade's shooting 2 days later may have been misguided retaliation against the most visible rival crew in Detroit. The third possibility reaches further back than either album, label, or nightclub confrontation, connecting everything with Detroit's old East Side and West Side divisions. Dr. Carl Taylor described those loyalties as products of geography, class perceptions, neighborhood identity, plus tensions extending through generations of city history. In that environment, the Cheddar Boys' name may have served as a symbol carrying much older resentments between interconnected local circles. The dispute then became one spark inside a city already reporting hundreds of shootings during the first half of 2004. None of those explanations accounts neatly for every victim, every attack, or every decision made during those 7 violent months. Anthony Roberson had no documented role in either rap camp, yet he died after recognizing Wipeout outside the candy bar and approaching him. Wipeout's funeral required police inside Community Christian Fellowship Church, while terrified mourners briefly believed another attack had entered the sanctuary. 2 days after Wipeout's death, gunmen found Blade's Oak Park address, entered his home, fired an AK-47, then disappeared without arrest. Every thread eventually returned to Blade's Range Rover, although each one carried different motives, suspects, and levels of proof. The original Cheddar Boys dispute explained public hostility, while the necklace story offered another reason somebody might have targeted Wipeout that night. East-West history explained why retaliation could spread quickly, though it never identified who ordered either assault against Blade. By the time 17 rounds struck the passenger side at West 7 Mile and Faust, Detroit understood the sequence far better than the reason. Blade Icewood's story continued through his son, Darnell Lindsay Jr., who was only 5 years old when his father died in 2005. As Lil Blade, he grew up hearing that his voice, face, mannerisms, and movements carried an almost uncomfortable resemblance to the man Detroit remembered. Instead of avoiding that comparison, he relicensed Icewood Entertainment, released his own projects, and then built Icewood Forever into a merchandise brand preserving the family name. His music moved toward a cooler, more relaxed style, separating his identity from the harder street narratives that shaped Blade's final years. Lil Blade also inherited the Blade dance, a two-armed chopping motion his father used around 2004 to tell people to boss up. The gesture first spread through Joy Road circles, Detroit clubs, neighborhood schools, and local music videos before eventually reaching audiences far outside Michigan. Years later, NFL players began performing similar movements after touchdowns, sacks, and major plays, while national commercials carried the celebration without explaining its Detroit roots. For Lil Blade, seeing that motion on television offered proof that his father's influence had traveled farther than Blade ever lived to witness. That legacy later expanded beyond music through the Icewood Foundation, which Lil Blade created to assist single mothers facing the pressures his own family experienced. His mother raised him and his sister after their father's murder, giving the foundation a personal purpose tied directly to the consequences of Detroit violence. In January 2025, the organization partnered with the Brency and Winston Foundation for a youth workshop focused on mentorship, leadership, and entrepreneurship. Brency and Winston described the effort as showing young Detroit residents another route beyond becoming products of the same environment that shaped earlier generations. Detroit still suffered another devastating loss before the city had fully processed Blade's murder, when Deshaun Proof Holton was killed in April 2006. Proof, D12's leader and Eminem's closest friend, died after an altercation inside the CCC Club on 8 Mile Road. His death had no documented connection with the Cheddar Boys dispute, yet it struck the same compact hip-hop community that had already lost Wipeout and Blade. Within roughly 19 months, Detroit had watched three important figures fall to gunfire across separate conflicts that shared the same clubs, friendships, and neighborhoods. Blade's case survived for years through mixtapes, local interviews, record stores, message boards, family memories, and artists carrying his slang into newer music. The strongest contemporary account came from Metro Times reporter Kari Kimani Turner, whose October 2004 investigation followed Wipeout's funeral, Blade's shooting, neighborhood fears, and competing motive theories. That reporting preserved Anthony Roberson's death, the platinum necklace story, police uncertainty, plus the private claim that Blade and Wipeout wanted everything kept on records. Without that investigation, much of the case might have remained trapped inside rumor, fan retellings, and scattered Detroit recollections. In September 2023, TV One's Sins of the City finally brought the story to a wider national audience nearly 2 decades after the violence. The episode featured Lil Blade, Con Santori Davison, Chanel Dominique, Lando Bando, archival photographs, and older reporting from Detroit's hip-hop community. By then, artists including Doughboy's Cash Out, Baby Smooth, Dam Doe, Dam John Boy, V's, and J.U.S. had already kept Blade active inside the city's musical vocabulary. Their references showed that his influence survived through delivery, posture, slang, sampling, neighborhood memory, and the independent business model he represented. The man sitting inside that silver Range Rover died at West 7 Mile and Faust after roughly 17 rounds were entered through the passenger side. Detroit never buried the larger figure built from Street Lords Records, the wheelchair comeback, Icewood Entertainment, the Blade dance, and unanswered questions surrounding Wipeout. His son carried the name forward. Younger rappers carried the sound, while football players unknowingly carried one of his most recognizable gestures nationwide. Blade Icewood's life ended at the car wash, yet the legend remained embedded inside Detroit long after the gunfire stopped.